right, so hey Amalia,
Hi.
thanks for talking today. I'm really excited to hear from you about, kind of cultural competencies and in therapy and where therapy maybe misses the mark and how, I guess, like how race is incorporated into this whole conversation. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I'm super excited to dive into this. So, yeah, my name is Amalia Mirazrio. I'm a therapist. I live in Detroit. I work with people virtually in Michigan and Pennsylvania. My private practice is really centered around helping people through breakups. So that might not immediately seem relevant to this, but I mean, like you were saying, race is everywhere. It impacts all facets, certainly influences dating and breakups. But then myself, so my mom is white. My dad is from Mexico City. It has like a darker brown skin tone. And so I want to be really clear about kind of like, where I am socially located in terms of race, that I'm Mexican American, mixed race. And that's kind of the subjectivity I'm bringing to this. So cultural competency in therapy is this idea that the therapist should be knowledgeable of a client's culture and differences, and that the more that the therapist knows about the client's culture, the more comfortable the client will be. So there's this idea that essentially a therapist should be able to work with someone of any cultural background if they research and know about that person's culture and how that would influence whatever mental health issues they're bringing into the room. I have so many thoughts on that. So I'm not a huge fan of this model. I think it sounds like a nice idea, but I think it really oversimplifies all of the power dynamics and nuance that go into the therapist and client relationship. There's this idea that, first of all, I think it's really the way it's taught in grad programs, or at least my grad program, the way that it's sort of structured in the field, it's speaking to a white therapist. And that's never said. It's not like, hey, we want to teach white people to be more, knowledgeable of other cultures, but it's implied. It's just understood that you're speaking to a white audience and we want to help you know how to work with non-white clients.
And is the industry mostly white?
It's predominantly white women. Where I take issue with the way that it's taught is that it's not named. So this idea that whiteness is neutral, that if you are white, you don't have a subjectivity, you are just the status quo, you are neutral, you're coming from the neutral place if you're white. And
Interesting.
So we don't have to name whiteness, whereas I would have so much more respect for this idea of let's name that you are white and this is your culture, this is your subjectivity. But instead it's well, you're normal and we're going to teach you how to work with people outside of what's normal, who are different.
Is it doing more harm than it is help, or how?
I think it can do a lot of harm, personally. I think it can give this idea that you can learn someone else's culture, from a textbook. It really oversimplifies even the nuance that exists within a culture. How do you even define culture? What is culture? There, you're in Washington, D.C., I'm in Detroit. Those are two different cultures geographically. And that's someone coming in and being well, you're all in the US, you're all the same. And I think it's okay to be sensitive about no, we're not all the same. We call it pop and you say soda, and there's a lot of pickup trucks on the road here. That's part of the culture of Michigan. And all of that gets lost, where it really gets boiled down to what I would say are just stereotypes. So that can look like a lot of stereotypes of I can speak from my experience of Latinx women are so oppressed because of machismo, and the men are so violent and sexist, and it's like, whoa, like you need to take like 5 steps back. Like, what did you just say?
Yeah.
I remember in grad school being in a class where there was a vignette, of a fictional family, and okay, here's this, teenager who is, Latinx and is going to come out as, I don't remember if it was like what they had, like they were of part of like the queer community. I don't remember the exact identity of this fake person, but it was like, okay, like how are you as a therapist going to support the family through this process? And immediately the professor, multiple students jumped on the bandwagon of like, well, we know that the family is not going to be accepting because of their culture. And I'm like, whoa, like it says nowhere in this vignette that the parents are homophobic, that the parents struggle with this. Like, you're inserting that because you think you're having cultural competency because you are looking at a stereotype that they are going to be super Catholic, they're going to be super conservative, that they're not going to be accepting. And that is one option that is possible, but that is a sweeping generalization.
Yeah. Yeah. And then with it being taught that way, like how does that impact then, when people go out into the field and are actually practicing?
Exactly. So a therapist can very easily insert that into a session where, if you can imagine, you're talking about these very vulnerable whatever you're bringing to therapy, it's going to be vulnerable. Like whatever's brought you into the room is going to be something that is tender. And you're talking, you're sharing, maybe you're sharing about your family dynamic, maybe you're sharing about your relationship, like whatever it might be, to have the therapist either explicitly or like implicitly, communicate that, oh, it must be because of this stereotype. Like, oh, of course you're having this problem in your family. It's because XYZ. And a therapist needs to be really, really careful that that information is actually coming from the client and not coming from their stereotypes, because they might really think like, oh, I'm doing great, I'm practicing my cultural competency, I learned this in school, that
Right.
this culture, like, again, like what is culture, but like that this culture like thinks this way and operates this way.
Well, yeah. And then thinking about how, like you're saying, people are coming in already in like a vulnerable place. Not saying all therapists are this way, but the way that these competencies are set up, it sounds like it just adds another barrier for people of color.
No, you're absolutely right. And when you're already feeling vulnerable and you take that big risk to open up to someone and to ask for help, to start to trust them, it's absolutely, I think, for clients of color, that process of finding a therapist can be even more discouraging, or just so tiring that there's this other filter, this other layer that you're putting on of like, are they going to really be able to see me as a full person and listen to me and hold space for all of my parts and not just jump to these assumptions.
Yeah. What do you think is the solution to this issue?
Yeah, there's a new term. I don't know how new it is, but there's a term of cultural humility that I know a lot of practitioners are embracing, that is more centered on the therapist knowing themselves, of let me practice humility and let me be honest with myself with what I might be assuming, what I might know, but really let me have the humility of knowing that I don't know. And that's a much better place to work from, to like you're saying, it's a hard balance because you don't want to expect a client to have to educate you, but you can be a little bit more open and tuned in to listening and making sure your data is coming from your conversations with your client.
Yeah. And so this is, in thinking about this, well, first of all, I think what you're saying about this cultural humility, is that what you called it? I like, I think that is even just a good practice that everybody can take into consideration, is this thing of just like being more curious and more open to understanding, and that sometimes it's going to be, awkward or uncomfortable, but just knowing that you're never coming in with all of the information. Like I just feel like there's this whole universe of information, and we're never going to get it completely. Like we're never going to know all of it. And I mean, even like you're saying, which I think is a whole other like really important conversation we could have, is just around how many nuances there are within different, cultures and different races, and just, and because of that, it's okay to not know everything, and it's okay to like approach things with curiosity instead of with like coming in with all the knowledge. Like nobody expects everybody to know everything, and I'm going to get anywhere if everybody's coming in with the assumption that they have to know everything. Like I don't know.
Absolutely. And the way that therapists are trained, part of their skill set lends itself really well to that we're trained to be very curious, and we're helping the people we work with get in touch with their own curiosity about their own life. That, how can we help you feel more curious and open to what's going on for you, and less afraid of it, and less likely to just shut it down. And so that works really well. Like, okay, therapists should already have some of these skills and can use these skills when they're working across racial lines. But that part about the perfectionism that I'm hearing, of that therapists might feel like, I have to be perfect, I have to be all knowing. I think that that touches on so many other really important things. That touches on white saviorism. If we're talking about, white therapists, that touches on the way that white supremacist culture teaches you need to be perfect. That touches on there was another one, just like, white fragility, right? Of
Yes.
like, I can't be wrong, I can't make a mistake, I have to say the perfect thing. And so, I mean, these all like work together to make it actually really something that a therapist has to seek out to work through. Like, this isn't just built into therapist training programs. The forces of white supremacist culture are very much at play in the way that therapists are trained. It's not this like utopian bubble that somehow exists outside of white supremacy. Like, that's a really nice idea, but that's completely false.
Yeah. And I mean, and true for, I think, all industries that have a licensing body in America. It's definitely not limited to therapy. And I think it is so important to be able to recognize where white supremacy is at play in your own industry. So you can, we can like examine that in ourselves and make sure that we're fighting it and dismantling it and breaking it down and doing everything that we can to make it make more inclusive spaces and just make things better.
Absolutely. We're not picking on therapists just to pick on therapists.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I wanted to speak a little bit about this process of choosing a therapist. And so Lindsay is friends with my sister, and my sister and I were recently talking about some of this, and I was like, why don't people like do XYZ? And she's like, no one knows this. Like, you can't just expect that non-therapists know this. I'm like, okay, I guess that's fair. So to like look a little bit behind the curtain of like the world of therapists and like what is going on in that world for you as a consumer when you were thinking about picking a therapist, I wanted to talk a little bit about the difference between going to someone in private practice, probably paying out of pocket, versus going to someone in a group practice that maybe takes your insurance, or going to like an agency. And I want to be really clear that if you do not have the economic resources to pay out of pocket for therapy, that's okay. And like, please just trust that whoever you're working with is holding their own boundary and taking care of themselves and doing whatever they need to do. Like, this is not to shame someone for taking advantage of like an agency where maybe they're receiving free services or low cost services or whatever. Like, that's all well and good. That's on that individual therapist to like manage their boundaries and stuff. And most private practice therapists who are private pay still have some lower fee slots, and there's absolutely no shame in needing that. But I am guessing that many of your friends and viewers do have the economic resources to be able to choose who they want to work with and to be able to pay out of pocket. So I wanted to speak to that a little bit, that I think in the US, we really like to get things like as cheaply as possible. And we're always like looking for the best deal. And I think that unfortunately that has really crept into the way that some people pick a therapist, of like who has the lowest fee or who takes my insurance. And when we're speaking specifically about race dynamics in therapy, I think it's important for people to know that a lot of therapists of color who are working for themselves and are in private practice, one of the reasons they might have chosen to leave agency settings is because of the burden of being the person of color on staff at their agency setting.
Okay.
And that they may have felt unsupported by supervisors. They might have been having to endure racism from clients. They may have been put in the position of being the race expert at their agency with no added pay or title, right? It's just, you're the go-to person for this. And, you know, and all of this for probably a very low salary, if they aren't lucky enough to have a salary, because the fee for service model is with no benefits is also a very big thing. Oh. And so I just want to like put this plug that if you have the ability to pay, if you know, someone out of pocket, especially if they are a person of color, know that they probably have come from some of this background, and that's part of what the push was for them to go out on their own. And so like, rather than looking at like who's the cheapest, like really using your economic privilege of like whose values align with mine, who has the skill set I'm looking for, and where do I want my money to go? You know, the same way that you might be supporting local businesses over, you know, Amazon, and you might be trying to like push yourself to you know, speak with your dollars in other ways. This is the same. It's another chance for you as a consumer to shop local, essentially.
Oh, interesting.
Many things can be true at once, right? Like, it is absolutely true. There are incredible, phenomenal therapists working in agency settings or who take insurance and who are doing really, really great work, right? And it can also be true that part of paying out of pocket means that your therapist is having the economic resources they need to take better care of themselves. And the better they're able to take care of their needs, the more they're going to be able to show up for you. Just like they're modeling, you by going to therapy are trying to take care of your needs so you can show up for the people in your life.
Yeah.
To be a systemic change of the way that insurance companies value therapists and the way that insurance companies treat therapists. This is what leads to therapists having 40 sessions a week because they need to make ends meet. And they're burnt out and they're tired and they're not able to show up fully, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's this like idea that therapists who don't take insurance are greedy, but like, we're not over here trying to be, you know, Jeff Bezos. Like, we're just like, no, like I'm trying, like I have X amount of student loans and this many master's degrees and this many licenses. And like, I'm trying to make like a solid, professional
Y-
wage.
Yeah, I'm trying to pay off loans and pay my mortgage and, eat during the week. Like, wow. Okay. And why? So does insurance treat therapists the same way? Is this how it works for all doctors and medical professionals? Oh,
No, so like, how when you go to the dentist, like, how there's like different levels of dentists? Like
mhm.
some dentists are like mom and pop and you never really have to pay very much. And then some
Yeah.
dentists, it's like, why is this cleaning an extra $75?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Because dentists are allowed to charge whatever they want. And so even if they take insurance, they're allowed to like charge the consumer the difference.
Oh, I get it. Okay.
But
Okay.
therapists are not. That's like illegal. So
Oh,
it's specifically screwing over therapists. And I don't know if there are other, I don't take insurance. I don't know like a ton about if this happens to other medical professionals.
do you know, are there resources for people who can't, or who don't have the resources to pay for a therapist? If there's anything out there for?
Yeah, so there's a website called Open Path that is a collective of therapists who are in private practice who devote a certain number of slots to, I think they ask for anywhere from $30 to $60 out of pocket, and it exists outside of the insurance system.
Okay.
Most therapists in private, so that's just a way of getting connected, because most therapists in private practice do have a set number of slots that are devoted to, the lower fee slots. I think that's a workaround.
Oh, are there therapist directories? Like, how do people find you?
Oh, so a really good resource to find a therapist is inclusivetherapist.com. And that's a really great directory. The Open Path is for the low fee, $30 to $60. Those are the two directories that I think their values probably align better, like different things. But Inclusive Therapist is a really great directory. And there's like Therapy Match, Therapy Den, or no, Mental Health Match, Therapy Den. There's a lot of other directories that aren't as well known, but that most therapists still use.
Oh, okay. Okay, cool.
Therapy
Yeah,
Den. Therapy Den is a good one. Yeah.
Therapy Den. Okay.